Hi.
Hi.
How are you?
Very good, Howard.
I just have some questions for you. So, could you talk a little bit about how ASCII influenced you in your life and career in regard to mathematics and the mathematics of Ramanujan?
Yeah, so ASCII joined the faculty of the University of Wisconsin, I think either 1 or 2 years before I got my PhD. And unfortunately, I didn't have the opportunity to take any classes from him because I don't think he taught any graduate courses or advanced courses while I was there in my last 1 or 2 years. However, in my thesis, I had a lot of ordinary and some modified Bessel functions appearing. In fact, almost every chapter of my thesis there were Bessel functions. So my advisor, Ron Smart, gave a preliminary copy of my thesis to Dick ASCII, and I don't remember the exact comments that he made, but since then he stayed with me and I stayed with him, so to speak, as I continued working in special functions, and then when I started working with Ramanujan, which would have been 8 years after I finished, or 7 years after I finished my PhD. So a lot of so what I would do, so he became very interested in Ramanujan's work, like many people did around the time of George Andrews finding the lost notebook in 1976. So, and I started work on the notebooks in 1975, as I recall. Anyway, I would send Dick chapter by chapter. So in other words, I can't say I send him every chapter that I wrote, but most of the chapters that I wrote over 20 years on the notebooks, I sent him a copy, and before, so usually I would, for most of the work, I would work with my students or work alone and publish papers. So I should correct myself a little bit. I sent him preliminary drafts of my papers as well as preliminary drafts of my chapters for when I started writing these for notebooks. So he received a lot of preliminary work from me on both my papers and especially on the chapters I wrote for the notebooks. So that continued. Also later, when George Andrews and I wrote similar chapters on Ramanujan's Lost Notebook. So I would always send him chapters for his comments, and I got lots of comments. Some chapters he wasn't really that interested in the work, but in the chapters where there was a lot of hard analysis, special functions, integrals, series identities, these are the chapters that he could comment with authority on. So,
did you get the feeling, did Ramanujan like Bessel functions?
So Ramanujan didn't have very many Bessel functions in his work, actually. So if you're familiar, I don't know if you're familiar with the one paper he published on Bessel functions, but it's Bessel functions in the integrand, but the integration variable is not the variable of the Bessel function, but of the index of the Bessel function. So, and then in an unpublished manuscript published then with Ramanujan's Lost Notebook, there are a couple of chapters or a couple of pages on Bessel functions, and I can't remember anything for sure specifically on Bessel functions. So there aren't many entries on Bessel functions. I might have forgotten some, but I don't think so. Yeah.
But Bessel functions, you found that Bessel functions helped in proving some of the identities that Ramanujan had?
Well, so I would say that, so it's hard to say, so I mean, there are a couple, the identities involving Bessel functions, especially these two infinite series identities, which are double series. These took a long time to prove, these series involving Bessel functions. And I think their importance has not yet been realized because they are connected with two famous problems, the divisor problem of Dirichlet and Gauss's circle problem. So in these two classical problems, there is an identity, one due to Voronoi and the other one actually due to Ramanujan, which are keys in examining these problems. The one due to Ramanujan on the circle problem is very unusual because Hardy wrote a paper, a definitive paper, getting lower bounds for the error term in the Gauss circle problem. And then in the same paper, he states this Bessel function identity, which is the key to obtaining upper bounds later for the error term. And Hardy says that Ramanujan sort of sent him the, I don't remember the exact phrase, the essence of this formula. Well, if he really had the essence, he would have had the formula itself. So why Hardy ever stated it this way, I don't know. So in other words, you wouldn't say, I guess there's a formula, infinite series involving Bessel functions for the, the summatory function of R2 of n, the number of representations of n is the sum of two squares. So so that famous identity appeared first in Hardy's paper. It doesn't appear in any of the work of Ramanujan, either in his published papers or in the notebooks. But so in the lost notebook, in this unpublished manuscript, there are two double series identities.
Yes.
And one for each of those two famous problems. And they contain an extra parameter. So often in mathematics, in particular analytic number theory, if you have an extra parameter, then you can sort of do things more, with the identity or whatever you're studying. But I've never been able, and no one else unfortunately either, has been able to take these identities and really maybe, do some work with the extra parameter in order to get any headway on these two famous problems. So they're beautiful identities in themselves, and I love the identities. They were very hard to prove. For one of them, it took 6 or 7 years.
Wow.
So, so my main collaborators in this time were my former student Sun Kim and my colleague Alexander Zavorescu. And then for the divisor function identity, the last stage was done with Zavorescu's student Junxian Li. So these are those that were sort of involved in the proofs of these identities. So their importance, I think, remains to be given. Hopefully they really will be useful.
So Watson, of course, wrote this amazing treatise on Bessel functions. Any sign that he was familiar with any of this work related to Ramanujan?
Well, Watson altogether wrote approximately 30 papers on Ramanujan's work. Yeah.
I see.
And I don't recall if any of them involved Bessel functions or not. But I think it's 5 of the papers, maybe 4 of the papers, have to do with modular equations. And for some reason, Watson published them in German.
Really?
So, yeah, the only people interested in this type of work were in England. So why he published them in German journals, I don't know.
And Watson was English, right?
Yeah, and Freeman Dyson famously said that Watson liked to keep things for himself. And, he protected his garden and didn't let anyone in the garden. So maybe he didn't want to let the other English mathematicians into the garden of modular equations. And so he published them and wrote them in German. And, yeah.
Is that maybe have some connection with the fact that he held on to these notebooks and never shared it with the world?
Well, so what Watson did is after Ramanujan went back to India, a copy of the notebooks was made by hand by a librarian at the University of Madras.
Oh.
So this copy of the notebooks, handwritten copy, then was sent to Hardy. And then Watson made a handwritten copy of Hardy's handwritten copy.
Okay.
So this is the copy that then Watson worked with.
Oh, I see. So for him to make this handwritten copy must have meant he really appreciated the
Oh,
importance
yeah,
of it.
yeah. No.
Ah, so fascinating. I think I have a couple of more questions. One had to do with the fact that, oh yes, so you have this large collection of correspondences with ASCII, and you very graciously written notes on these correspondences that you've had. Do you have any comment that you'd like to make on these and why the world might be interested in learning more about this?
Yeah, so most of them have to do with comments on the chapters that I was writing on the notebooks. Yeah, I don't really have any more comments to make except that this is evidence of how ASCII helped me a lot in writing.
And also his opinions.
Oh yeah, right. Yeah.
Yes, very nice. The other thing was during ASCII's Liber Amicorum, when we presented, you weren't actually there, but when we presented it to him, he was in hospice, close to his death. But I remember during that, before we ended, there was something. It seemed urgent that he wanted to say, and it had to do with you, and I couldn't figure out what it was. I wonder if you might have any ideas what he was trying to say.
No, I really didn't. I don't. I did visit, my wife and I did visit him while he was in hospice. And first, so the only personal thing that he said to me was when we first entered the room, he said, "You didn't attend the conference that I had at the Math Research Center," and I forgot what year in the 1970s.
With Andrews, or?
Yeah, so I don't remember the year, I'm sorry.
Okay.
But he had a big conference on special functions at the Math Research Center at the University of Wisconsin, I think in the 1970s. And he said, "Oh, you didn't attend that conference." That's what he, what a different thing, a strange thing to remember about me. And then the reason was that we were snowed in. We couldn't get to the conference because of snow. And,
in fact, I was talking with Murad Ismail, and he indicated that there was something, I might be mistaken, but I think he said there was something very important about that meeting. And he wanted me to recollect some thoughts about that. I don't know.
You
don't know either?
I don't know. Yeah.
Okay. Well, thank you so much for talking to me.
Okay.
Really appreciate it.
Yeah, you're very welcome.